are very concerned about what the 2022 is going to look like when it comes to the economic situation. Joining us right now to discuss that is Joel Griffith from the Heritage Foundation. Good morning to you, Joel.
Hey, good morning. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you and Merry Christmas. Praise be to God. We're glad you're on with us. We have just a few minutes before we go to break. We'll continue after the break. But I was just setting up and talking about that big 4.5 million report that came out of people who didn't want their jobs apparently last November. Maybe you can touch on that first.
Oh, sure. About 4.5 million people last month voluntarily chose to leave their jobs. That's a record number of people. That's about 3% of the workforce, and in some industries it's even far higher. In the hospitality sector, about 6% of all workers actually chose to leave their jobs. And that's not people that are just choosing not to work. Those are actually people mostly that are actually going to other jobs, because right now the labor market is so hot. There's almost an all-time record number of job openings, about 10 million job openings right now, which are near all-time highs. So what you see right now is you see businesses need people because so many people have left the labor force. They're increasing wages in part to keep up with the cost of living, which is skyrocketing. And so that's inducing people to move on and to find better paying work.
Yeah, so there's more jobs available than there are people who want to work. Are these companies, are they just not paying enough? Is this a situation where they just need to pay more, offer better benefits? Are they being stubborn? I mean, we're looking at record inflation.
Well, our government has caused a lot of these problems. I mean, think about the vast expansion of the social safety net, of the welfare state, of all the payments that were distributed across the country to people, whether they needed them or not.
Yeah.
And, of course, the very generous unemployment benefits that we saw that often resulted in people making more on unemployment than they made on the job. That has led to a lot of people actually dropping out of the labor force or refusing to take jobs they otherwise would have taken. So government has created this labor shortage, and that's something we need to keep in mind throughout this. You know, when you've got a fully functioning free market economy and wages are rising, those wages rise because productivity is increasing. What we see right now, we actually see productivity diminishing, and we see prices surging because government reduced supply by all the shutdowns and restrictions over the past year and a half, and at the same time we had our government borrowing and printing trillions of dollars, driving up demand. So this time around, with these rise in wages, don't look at this. We need to remember, wages are not keeping up with the cost of living. Government has wreaked havoc in our economy.
Hold that thought. Joel Griffith is our guest. He's a research fellow, financial regulations at the Heritage Foundation. We're going to go to a short break. We're going to come right back and continue this conversation. I want to throw into the mix the supply chain woes, ranchers, farmers. How about China and their economic pressure all around? All of that coming up right after this very short break with Joel Griffith. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. I'm sitting in the great state of Texas right now, and let me tell you, every time I have to fill my gas tank up, I mean, I get like 15 miles to the gallon in a 45-minute commute. So it matters to me that $3 a gallon in a state where we were exporting oil in the last administration is scary to me. What do you see in 2022 when it comes to that?
Well, the first thing that the Biden administration did when they came into office, I think on the first day, was actually cancel the Keystone XL pipeline that would have ensured a stable, big supply of oil coming in from our ally Canada across the northern United States. They killed that pipeline, and that is going to have a long-term impact on our oil supply. They also attempted to ban drilling on federal land or put a moratorium in place. Now, some of that has been struck down by the courts, but what this has done is it has sent a message to fossil fuel producers that this government is going to try to make future investment and future production difficult on them. And if you look at the packages, the legislation that the Biden administration has pushed forward, it's been in large part a rendition of the Green New Deal, which would make us so-called carbon emissions neutral, shifting us to far more expensive and less reliable so-called green energy sources. So, you can't place all the blame on the current rise in prices on the administration, because some of that is due to the economy reopening. But the actions they have taken overwhelmingly ensure that energy costs are likely going to be higher than they would have been. in the absence of all these absurd environmental regulations and this attempt to push us into this Green New Deal.
And so in 2022, do you see that getting worse? I mean, like some people are saying, I mean, I know in California they've been paying $4+ a while now, but in Texas, $3 is super high. Do you see it getting as much as $4?
Well, it could happen. Price prediction is difficult because there are many other factors at play besides just government policy. Oil prices are known to be quite volatile. I mean, think back even over the last few years prior to the Biden administration, we had swings in energy from $4 a gallon to $2 and back up to $4 because it is very sensitive to refiners and producers being able to actually meet the market, the actual market demand. They try to make economic estimates to determine how much to invest, how much to produce, but sometimes those estimates are wrong, and that's what we saw happen recently. We saw a good part of the world open up more quickly than some forecasters had predicted, and it caught a lot of producers flat-footed. But what we do know is that when you send signals to the marketplace that their investment dollars aren't welcome, that we're going to make it more difficult for them to produce in the future, they stop making those investment decisions now. And that's my big concern, is that we need to prepare for the future, and a lot of our fossil fuel companies, they're not doing so because they know government might actually stop them in the process. And you look back over the past 10 years, we had a natural gas boom in this country. It made energy costs far more affordable. It ensured that we were no longer dependent on foreign oil. And it also made manufacturing here more competitive because manufacturing is very energy intensive. So when you see these left-wingers in Congress and you see the administration trying to shut down natural gas, trying to shut down coal, trying to shut down oil, that is a warning sign to all of us that energy costs could be more expensive long into the future.
Mr. Griffith, we also see the value of the dollar going significantly lower over the past, couple of years. But what's your take on the rise of cryptocurrency, and do you think that's a viable alternative now for people to invest in?
Well, the demand for cryptocurrency shows that a lot of people are uncomfortable with what our country is doing with fiat. We have our central bank really creates the money, and we've seen our central bank print quite a bit in order to buy government debt over the past year and a half especially. We've also seen our central bank purchase a lot of mortgage assets, which has helped actually make housing a lot more expensive, and there is a deep concern over that, and I think that it reflects it. Now, of course, there's risks involved as well, and we could probably spend hours talking about those risks of that asset class or any other asset class, but I do think that it reflects the concern that a lot of individuals have that their fiat currency, if they just park it in a bank account, is actually worth less year over year because inflation is eroding the value of that dollar.
Yeah. What concerns me is capital gains tax, but that's a different topic for a different day. We're talking with Joel Griffith. He is a research fellow for the Institute for Economic Freedom and Opportunity at the Heritage Foundation about the economy of 2022 and its outlook. What I would dislike more than having to pay more than $3 a gallon at the pump in Texas is not getting my steak on time. And we're seeing this week stories come out about the Biden administration wanting to try to stimulate farmers, ranchers, and this is a story where we've covered in the past. In fact, I've invited ranchers on in the show in the past to talk about some of the difficulties that most Americans are unaware of, that family-owned farms are struggling, have been for a while now, and the pandemic made that infinitely worse. Not to mention that I think it's 3 of the 4 packers are foreign-owned. How do you see this story about the Biden administration wanting to try to stimulate this part of the industry?
Well, the Biden administration is realizing that Americans are deeply troubled by the soaring cost of living, including the soaring cost of meat in particular. Most of these meat products have gone up 15, 20, sometimes 30% year over year. It's becoming more expensive for people even to cook a burger at home right now. And they're realizing that there's people are pretty mad about it. So what the Biden administration is trying to do is put the blame on private business, as if they're at fault, as if they're gouging customers. Well, I think the Biden administration needs to start being a little more honest with us, and we know what is causing this big jump in cost for food products. A big part of this is the fact it's not just, if you buy a hamburger, it's not just the cow that is the primary component of your meal. You've got transportation costs. You have to ship these products. You have labor costs. You have energy costs. You've got costs for fertilizer. And in many instances, government, state, and the federal especially have been driving up these costs. COVID restrictions over the past year actually wreaked a lot of havoc on meat processing because there are a lot of distancing restrictions in place. A lot of those restrictions were absolutely absurd, but companies followed the lead of our CDC. Well, that wreaked havoc in the system. And then you have the rising energy costs. That's a big part of producing. I mean, if you're living in, let's say you're living in New Jersey, there's a good chance that your beef actually comes from the West. So you have to ship that beef. And as we know, gas costs have risen dramatically. And the Biden administration is likely to make that worse as well because of the vaccine mandate. Upwards of 30% of truckers have indicated they might no longer want to be in the business if they're forced to take them back. Well, what's that going to do to the cost of transportation? And then there's this whole other component that Biden didn't even mention in these remarks about food prices. You have new environmental restrictions coming into place that are dramatically increasing the cost of fertilizer. Well, that's pretty important, not just if you're buying corn, if you're buying the cow that eats the corn. So there's a lot that our government is doing that is actually responsible for these prices. It's not gouging. It's our government that are responsible for these huge jumps in food costs.
Talk about supply chain woes. I used to work in supply chain management, international supply chain management, way back in the day. And it's fascinating to me to see some of the breakdowns we're seeing and how it's impacting everybody's individual lives. I mean, I remember in 2020, it caught me off guard that I couldn't go to Best Buy, for instance, and buy a deep freezer. They were all out. They were gone. They were nowhere to be found. They were selling at a premium because they were being hoarded. And then all of a sudden, the shelves are becoming more and more bare. And now, from everything you just said, it seems like we could be living through some of those troubles more in the future. But we also realized in that process that we're so dependent upon China as our manufacturer for the whole world, not only in PPE, but also in all of the stuff we buy off of Amazon. And China is spending billions of dollars in their Belt and Road initiatives all over the world. How does China's economy impact ours?
Well, over the past year and a half, well, actually, I'd say especially over the past 6 months, that we've developed a lot of shortages in microchips and on basic products on our shelves. A lot of this is tied into both our own government's action on COVID and also other countries. And it wasn't just here that experienced these shutdowns. We actually saw over the summer and into the fall rolling shutdowns of factories across China, across parts of Southeast Asia, along with a number of the ports there being impacted by restrictions. So this has been very problematic. And if you look at how dependent we are, and this is a necessity of modern life, on microchips for not just our computers, but in our vehicles, in our appliances, this relies on those chips. And we had so much uncertainty introduced into the marketplace by governments across the world, including here, with these shutdowns, that demand really became skewed. And so when we saw demand rush back, we saw demand for a lot of these microchips increase, and that had a domino effect on many sectors of our economy here and abroad. And I think we're beginning to work through that now. And, it's amazing that the free market actually does respond even to this government the government absurdities that have occurred across the world. We saw the supply chain issues. We saw the microchip shortage. Well, guess what? We see the private sector, without government inducement, the private sector beginning to expand microchip capacity abroad, not just in China, but here and across the world. And so I think going forward, in a year or so, we're going to be in a much better situation to withstand some of these crises that are caused and created by the government. And regarding China, I think you raised a good point there. I think this underscores the importance of building out better trade relationships with our ally. Taiwan is a case in point. This administration should be moving forward to put in place a true free trade agreement with Taiwan that is standing firm against the tyranny in China. Let's go ahead and work more closely with them. It's good for our economy, and it's good for our national security, and it's good for our ally Taiwan.
Amen to that. Praise be to God. Joel Griffith, Research Fellow for the Institute of Economic Freedom and Opportunity at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you again for being on with us. We're very grateful to you. God love you. God bless you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right.